Mark chapter 6, verse 30. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a remote place and rest for a while." For many people were coming and going, and they did not have time to eat. So they went away in the boat by themselves to a remote place. But many saw them leaving and recognized them, and they ran on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. When he went ashore, he saw a large crowd and had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Then he began to teach them many things. When it grew late, his disciples approached him and said, "This place is deserted, and it is already late. Send them away so that they can go into the surrounding countryside and villages to buy themselves something to eat." "You give them something to eat," he responded. They said to him, "Should we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat?" He asked them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he instructed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. He took the five loaves and the 2 fish, and looked up to the heaven, and he blessed and broke the loaves. He kept giving them to his disciples to eat, to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. Everyone ate and was satisfied. They picked up 12 baskets full of pieces of bread and fish. Now those who had eaten the loaves were 5,000 men. So the apostles, they come back from their missions and they're telling Jesus of all that they've done. And recognizing that they're probably tired and hungry, Jesus suggests going away to find a place to rest. But the crowds notice them. So even though Jesus and the disciples went by boat, the people desperately run to the town that they were headed to, and they make it there before them. And when Jesus saw this, when he saw them, he, again, like we've read previously, he felt not just any kind of compassion, but in the Greek, the specific splagnitsomai. Okay, he felt this over the people. And this is, and I remind you, this is a deep-seated love and pity that you feel in the depths of your gut, and it moves you to take action. And Jesus saw them like, he felt like they were like lost sheep, right? Orphaned from their master, their shepherd. And so Jesus, he's moved to this compassion that compels him to act. And so he lends himself to them again, and he begins teaching them. But the disciples, they either wanted to finally get some rest, or they were actually worried about the people. But they told Jesus that it was getting late and there's no markets nearby, so we should send them off so that they can all go find something to eat before it gets too late. But Jesus, he emphatically says, "You feed them." Right? And since there were so many people, right? This is 5,000 men plus women and children. So we could only guess this could be anywhere from 8,000 to maybe 12,000 people. And so they sarcastically suggest, should we take 200 denarii, the 200 denarii that we don't have, and buy enough food? And a denarii is a day's wage. Okay, so 200 denarii would have been nearly a year's salary. So for us, that's about $65,000. So for us, somewhere between $50,000-$60,000, right? This is a lot of money, and this tells you that there were a lot of people. And when this passage tells us that the baskets were full, the word basket is a word that means large, heavy containers. Okay, so they're not just little baskets that you can just easily carry around, but they're large, heavy containers. And the word full is a word used to describe fattening animals. Okay, so these were large, heavy containers that were overflowing with food. And the passage tells us that the people were able to leave satisfied. Okay, so just imagine, what the disciples are going through here, right? They're already tired, haven't gotten any rest, are probably really hungry. They're just looking for a break. And then here comes this crowd again, and they see 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish feed thousands of people. Okay, so just imagine what kind of state they're in, what kind of mindset they're in. And immediately, verse 45, he made his disciples get into the boat, and we already know that they've seen crazy things on boats already. But he makes his disciples go ahead of him to the other side in Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. And after he said goodbye to them, he went away to the mountain to pray. Well into the night, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. He saw them straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Very early in the morning, he came toward them, walking on the sea, and wanted to pass by them. When they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out, because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke with them and said, "Have courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Then he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. They were completely astounded because they had not understood about the loaves. Instead, their hearts were hardened. Okay, so they've already, seen the impossible act with feeding the thousands of people, and now they see this. Okay, and so they're astounded and their hearts are hardened. Okay. So John chapter 6, verses 14 through 15 actually indicates that this crowd, the people that were just fed, they wanted to make Jesus king. Okay. And so the people aren't just letting him go. And so he, I don't know, maybe he thought the disciples were probably tired, hungry. He sends them on ahead. To cross over the sea again, right, away from the crowds. And he, in the meantime, is, kind of dispersing the crowd, dismissing them, telling them to go home. Okay, and then Jesus, he gets away and he goes up to mountain to pray, right? He takes this opportunity to recharge, to reconnect with the Lord. And sometime after 3 o'clock in the morning, okay, Jesus, he sees his disciples stuck out in the middle of the sea, right? The winds are so strong that they are not able to sail through it. And this time, he literally walks on water to pass by them. And the disciples, they start screaming because they think that they're seeing a ghost, right? They're seeing this illusion. And Jesus tells them to not worry, and he tells them that it is I am. Okay, and he refers to himself as with this ancient, sacred name of God. Right, I am. Right, so the way that God revealed himself to Moses and the other greats, right? I am. Jesus refers to himself in the same way to the disciples. And then he gets onto the boat and the winds cease. So the disciples are hit with a double whammy of seeing Jesus feed somewhere around 10,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And now this crazy, freaky stunt of walking on water. So instead of being moved to faith, their hearts were hardened. Even though they had performed miracles with their own hands after Jesus gave them the authority to, they still kind of ended up like Jesus' hometown and the scribes and the Pharisees, and they couldn't accept that he was God, right? That he was actually God, as Jesus referred to himself as I am. Right? They couldn't fully accept Jesus for who he was. Verse 53, When they had crossed over, they came to shore at Gennesaret and anchored there. As they got out of the boat, people immediately recognized him. They hurried throughout the region and began to carry the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. Wherever he went, into villages, towns, or the country, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch just the end of his robe, and everyone who touched it was healed. And so, no matter how many times they cross over the sea, these crowds are unavoidable. Okay, and the word had spread everywhere now of these remarkable stories of Jesus. They had heard about Jesus having compassion, even though they were, people were busting through Peter's roof to get their friend healed, right? They lowered their friend on a mat, and they heard the story of the bleeding woman who had gotten healed just by touching the clothing of Jesus. And so now everyone's doing it. Everyone's bringing the sick on mats, and they're trying to just get a touch of Jesus' clothing, and they're getting healed. And the disciples, sleep deprived, not sure what they believe, they kept following Jesus through these tireless, unending crowds. Were they seeing it now? Right? Were their eyes opening now? Right? Were they seeing it? Right? They were used to staying up late into the night to catch fish for money. But now they were losing sleep to fish for people. Right? Were they seeing it now? Were they seeing what Jesus called them out to do? Right? Jesus called them out from being fishermen to being fishers of men. Were they seeing it now? Were they seeing that their nets were full? Right? The nets were just brimming with people. Were just busting open with people. Right? Were they seeing it now? Few prayer points. Number one, what do you have to offer the Lord? What are your 5 loaves and 2 fish? Ask God for the faith to believe that he can multiply and do great things with the little that you have. There's so many times in our lives where we feel like we aren't good enough. We just don't measure up to the standard of Christ. We're not smart enough. We're not intellectual enough. We don't have the credentials to do the work of God, right? To make disciples of others. But do you believe that God can take your little mustard seed and grow it into the biggest plant in the garden, right? Do you believe that God can multiply the little humble things that you invest into the kingdom? Number 2, do you truly believe that God is everything that he says he is? And what are some things that you struggle to believe? And why do you struggle to believe those things? Number 3, do you ever get tired of being a Christian? Why? And ask God to help you realize the awesome privilege of doing his work versus the things of this world.